Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this video for Paper 2, Section A. This is for those of you that are studying the political and social protest writing paper. And as you will know, the Section A of that paper is something that you've probably never read before. And the idea is that you've got to demonstrate not only your resilience in reading skills, but also your ability to connect and extract to the genre of political social protest. Because you've been studying that genre for a year, the idea is that you should be able to look for consistencies in terms of perhaps the set texts you have been reading in class and what comes up in the extract on the day. For this video, I'm going to be looking at the 2023 extract, which was called Lagoon. And it was known, I think, or is known as the Alien extract, and one which was, I think, not expected. This was the first example of more of a science fiction extract being used for this task. So that is why I think I'm going to focus on this one in this video. So as in previous videos for the unseen extract, I'm going to essentially go through ways to approach the task, engage with the synopsis box first, then discuss the extract in terms of significant factors that you might want to discuss. And then the video will finish with looking at what to include in the first paragraph of the essay, which is known as the overview. Essentially, this video follows the same structure as a video that I uploaded last week about the wall extract. So hopefully this will be useful if you are revising this particular task. So first things first, in the 10 years or so that this course has been being used, the question has always remained the same. The top question there, which begins with the word explore, is essentially inviting you to make your own judgment about the extract based on context, linguistics, interpretation, language, and so on. So the other AOs. AO2 also gets its own little prompt there, where it says you should remember to include relevant analysis in terms of how meaning has been shaped. So really what they need you to do, as it says there in the third bullet point, what are you going to analyse in terms of the language, or if it's a play, in terms of the staging, what themes do you see, and also what proves that this extract could fit into the genre of political social protest. So essentially you're bringing forward your knowledge of the genre from your set texts and essentially applying it to something that you may not have seen before. And it's also worth bearing in mind that even though prose extracts have by far been the most common extract form to use, poems and plays can also be used for this task. So far, as I'm doing this video in 2024, 25 even, only one poem has come up. So, you never quite know what actual type of text you're going to get. This was a prose extract, and all extracts will begin with what I call the synopsis box. It can also be known as the summary box, which is a small passage of text that the examiner will write for you in order to help you. So as I have said in previous videos, I will always get my students to spend about 5 minutes or so taking meaning from this small passage of text. And the idea is that doing so will help contextualize the extract which they are about to read. Essentially, the examiner is saying, we know you've not studied this before, and we know because this is your exam that can be quite scary, so let me help you. So the passage can help explain particular settings or characters. It can also give key dates. It can also sometimes give some important contextual information, which in this case might be to do with Nigeria. So always look out for this box and always read it, don't ignore it. So what I will get my students to do is I will get them to highlight the synopsis box, and I will get them to make short annotations about why, in their judgment, they have decided that that particular piece of information is important in contextualizing the extract. So if I was doing this task in this exam, and I was asked to highlight this text, this kind of summary box, then these pieces of information I think I would find most important. So you can pause this video now to kind of think about why I might have highlighted these things, or you can carry on watching and I can go briefly through some of the reasoning. So essentially, this is science fiction, and like I said at the beginning of the video, that was a bit strange for some learners because you expect with political and social protest there to be a high degree of social realism, which essentially means that the events are about something that's actually happened or are inspired by something that could happen or has happened. So to have a science fiction extract which includes a group of aliens was a little bit strange. But even though I was the examiner for this paper a couple of years ago, students did okay with it. So even though it was a little bit of a curveball, they tended to be okay. So science fiction essentially means it could be quite surrealist because we're dealing here with, potentially aliens and spaceships and goodness knows what else, which perhaps thankfully we don't have on planet Earth. This is almost just over 10 years old now, this extract, so it's modern prose. And the group of aliens who arrive in the city represents a threat. And what is noticeable when you look through a lot of the extract tasks, a lot of them do contain some kind of threat that threatens to change the status quo. And the arrival of these aliens does so in this extract as well. Some students were also arguing that these aliens are metaphorical, meaning an illegal alien is another word for an immigrant. So some students were making that interpretation too. As is also the case in a lot of the unseen extracts, and indeed some of the set texts that you may study during the year in class, there is also sometimes in political and social protest writing a degree of civil breakdown. And that creates a dystopia because there's a loss of law and order. And in this extract, because you have a president who represents rank and power, the president could be responsible because this civil breakdown has happened on his watch. So the extent to which he is responsible is almost inferred. It doesn't say explicitly that he's responsible, but sometimes, if not always, when a country or a nation goes through a particularly unpredictable period, it's often the politicians that get blamed for it because they are supposed to be the ones in control. And when this kind of thing happens, they're no longer in control. The president with a capital P, something that you should always look out for in unseen extracts, is to do with power, those who have power, those who do not. It's also a status name, it's a title, and that is also a pattern emerging now with these unseen extracts. You do get people that may be known as master or slave or president or prime minister and so on. So always look out for the ways in which characters are given a certain title. And as we'll discuss in a moment, one of the powers that one of the aliens has is they can transform themselves into something else. Famously, in this extract, the alien transforms herself into Karl Marx. And the fact that she can transform is not only a touch of magic realism, I would argue, but also something which is to do with the potential to be manipulative, because I'm sure if we all had the superpower of being able to transform ourselves into anything, that would be quite a good way to manipulate others, perhaps. And finally, we're dealing here with Nigeria. We're dealing here with an indigenous ethnic population. And from my experience of studying The Kite Runner with students, some of you might also do that novel, sometimes when you have an ethnic population, such as the Hazaras in that novel, it leads to a degree of prejudice and sometimes violence, unfortunately. So whenever you see the word ethnic or ethnicity, sometimes the power dynamic and the power hierarchy can be because of the differences in ethnicity. This is not to say that this is the only thing that is important from the synopsis box. There might be other things as well. But certainly for me, thinking that I've only got about 45 minutes or so to write about this extract, this is enough for me in order to then go forward and think about organising an essay and writing about it, analysing it. So, like I did in the wall video from last week, I thought it would just be interesting to show you what my extract looked like in preparation for this video. I can't just do a video without analysing the text first, and that's a good lesson because even though I've been doing this job now a long time, I can't just do a video without knowing the text. So the moral of the story is you need to know the text in order to talk about it. And that goes for students as well, of course. You cannot write a good essay without knowing the text. And it's often the case, if not always, that the extracts that have been annotated by the learners are always going to probably write better essays because they've just thought about what they're talking about and they've dealt with the evidence before them. So you can see there's also bits here that I haven't highlighted because I don't necessarily intend to talk about them. And because English is what it is, it's subjective. When you analyse your extract, it might look completely different. You might have picked completely different things to me, which is fine as well, because you could still do perfectly well by talking about different things. So that's what is in front of me as I talk to you now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly go through the extract. I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to just talk about why I've highlighted the things I've highlighted, and then I'll talk about the overview. So one of the things that I've noticed with this extract when I was analysing it myself earlier was the body language, the way in which the characters step forward, the way in which another one stepped up to him. So there's something here to body language. There's something here to do with defiance. They're not intimidated by the president. They're not hiding. And they're walking towards him, which I think in terms of proximity and in terms of body language shows a determination to have this conversation with him, to engage in this dialogue with him, regardless of his rank. The president, as is often the case, is shielded by those with military force. So famously, Buckingham Palace is surrounded by guards. So is, there used to be a policeman on the front of 10 Downing Street. I think they now stand at the gate at the end of the road. And also, if you think of the White House, there's armed police constantly on watch, protecting those with power. And that's the case here. So I've highlighted that because clearly there is a military force here, which might be at odds with the non-military force that the aliens are showing. It's interesting, I think, that the writer has decided to make the president poorly, or as in his words, nearly dead already. And that suggests a degree of frailty. He's clinging on to power, not just because the society that he's ruling over is in civil unrest and in breakdown, but also because of his health. And as we have seen in recent years with President Biden, for example, when he was in office, there were big question marks over his proficiency to lead America because of his frailty. And that might have been his undoing in the end and why he didn't run for a second term in 2024. So he's the president here is clinging on to power in two ways, both in terms of his health, but also because the society is kind of breaking down. Of course, the fact that he is at death's door, or at least it gives that impression, suggests that he's perhaps desperate. He's would do anything in order to prolong his life and therefore prolong his rule. And the aliens might be able to do that for him based on the end of this extract. We'll come to that in a minute. I've drawn a bracket around this dialogue here because it comes across as quite clipped and staccato, very short, there's no elaboration. And I think really for me, there was a sense here that the tension is building. We have a setting which is quite private. It's a confrontation between a small group of people, and that creates a degree of tension. There's a sense here that the dialogue has been structured in a way to build up to some kind of climax, and there is a climax kind of towards the middle of the extract. I've highlighted the quote from Igboland as a specific thing because it shows again the falling back into ethnicity, and perhaps that comment slightly underlined with a degree of prejudice, perhaps, um, and creating this kind of superiority inferiority kind of relationship. In other words, is she inferior simply because she looks ethnic? So that might be something else to develop in your answer. As we progress to the middle of the extract, and I use the word progress deliberately, and I'll come to that a bit later when I talk about the overview, we get lots of details which I've highlighted here in yellow, which are to do with the descriptions of the effect of the transformation has on the people around the president. They vomit, they get quite ill, they're terrified of this alien's ability to transform before their very eyes. And the fact that we have an omniscient narrator here, we don't have a first person narrator, we have an omniscient narrator, means that the writer is able to describe things in like a reported way. It's like reportage. They aren't limited just to one character's perception of events. They can have a much broader overview of what's going on because they're using an omniscient third person point of view. The descriptions of in the yellow here, the vomit, the breathing, the kind of the falling to the knees, the fainting, that kind of thing, conflicts with the power and the resoluteness, if that's a word, of the alien, who doesn't seem to show much weakness at all. So even though initially we expect the president and his military soldiers to be quite strong and I suppose impenetrable, this description of them suggests otherwise. They are actually shown here as to be quite weak. And that's also shown in those grey points here to do with the word powerless and also the verb whimpered. Though that verb whimpered, for example, is not a verb we would associate with somebody with power and authority. So the writer is clearly showing the contrast between those with power and those without. And it might be quite ironic. It might be not what we expect. I don't know quite how to pronounce this. Is it Ayadel or Ayadeli? I don't know. But one of the aliens transforms into a broad-shouldered, stocky white man. And this might be a comment towards gender, the idea being that as a woman, she doesn't have as much power, but as a man, she does. So transforming into a white man in terms of ethnicity and race, but also in terms of gender, means that perhaps she is challenging the president through swapping genders. The body language here as well of the hands on her hips and cocking her head, body language wise, shows that defiance. Now, the person that she transforms into is Karl Marx, which then creates a direct link to Marxism. And many students who were doing this 2 years ago in their answer did mention Marxism. They might have studied Marxism for their NEA, for example, where they would have used Marxism as a theory to interpret the text through. So students were quite good at seeing the surname Marx and linking it to Marxism. And some students were able to then link the ideals of Marxism to perhaps what the aliens are trying to establish here. So broadly speaking, Marxism to do with class and class struggles, and those class struggles leading to a sense of conflict, perhaps. The prospect of overthrowing the ruling class, which might happen here by the aliens, and the idea of the establishment of communism, the idea being that there are no class divisions, there's no private property, there's no exploitation. And that links to the idea of historical materialism, the idea being that change can only happen when opposing forces interact with each other. And that's, of course, what's happening here. The aliens and the president are conflicting forces, which might bring about a sense of change based on how the extract finishes. We'll come to that in a second. Students can still do quite well without having to give a summary of Marxism. And in fact, I would encourage students probably not just to give a generic description of Marxism, but to also make sure your comments about Marxism are linked to the events of the extract. Otherwise, students risk going off on a tangent, and the examiner might then begin asking, why is this relevant? And as soon as the examiner starts asking that, it might be that your marks have stopped. So always refer to historical or theoretical or contextual factors through the extract. The broken speech and the ellipsis of I suggests a degree of fragmentation and weakness, as does the verbal verb whispered. So again, a degree of challenging there his power and resoluteness. The adjective which is used to describe Ayodele or Ayodele is graceful, and that goes against or conflicts with the military force and brutality implied through the soldiers with their guns, for example. And then towards the bottom, we have more description of the weaknesses of those around the president. They start praying, they run away, one continued to sob. So they are not as authoritative and strong as perhaps initially thought. And that conflicts with the declarative sentences like, you believe in Marxism, yet you are too powerless to enact it, spoken as fact, spoken as truth from the alien, which conflicts with the kind of broken speech of the president. And then we get towards the end of the extract, and we've got a lot of dialogue here. I've grouped together in yellow what I was just talking about, the kind of the very declarative, calm, resolute, defiant language of the alien, conflicting with the broken and stuttering speech of the president. Short sentences like, I am change, I will make it so, is very kind of clear and defiant, spoken in a very matter-of-fact way. I have also, I think as well, she speaks with a degree of humour. Would you like me to look more Hauser? I think is a, or Hauser, I think is, to me, it has a degree of humour to it, as if she's mocking the president's focus on ethnicity. I've highlighted in blue the names of the aliens there because this is a small group of people. This is not a mob with pitchforks. This is a small group of people who are willing to challenge a man with power, surrounded by those with military force. So that reinforces how defiant these aliens may be. And then we get towards the end of the extract, and because of the health of the president there, the president seems now to be willing to enter into some kind of negotiation. The questioning, what do you want? And he replies to be alive again. So he's using his health as a way to bargain with the aliens here. And they just want a home. He wants to live longer. Maybe there is a mutual agreement that can be arrived at here to benefit both sides. We have a list of verbs: rule, colonize, conquer, or take, and those 4 verbs are intrinsically linked to what we expect from a powerful elite in political and social protest, the idea being that these are all things to do with exercising control and power over others. So those are things that jumped out at me when I was analysing this extract. So now that you have analysed and we've discussed the extract, we've now got to try and put it into some kind of essay structure. So just to clarify in terms of the key points, these are things that I've just spoken about in terms of if we were to put key ideas in one place. I think I've talked about them all. I don't think I need to go through a kind of any again. But in terms of structure, the extract is building towards the climax of that Karl Marx transformation. That seems to be the pinnacle or the pivotal moment once the president sees their capabilities, and then after that, willing to engage in some kind of bargaining or some kind of negotiation to benefit both sides. So the bottom point there, even though this is science fiction and perhaps not so much concerned with social realism, because we don't have aliens visiting this country and able to change disguise or identities at the moment, at least. Um, Even though it's science fiction, it does talk about things that are known. For example, immigration, when students were using these aliens as metaphorical for illegal immigrants or illegal aliens, as they're called in the United States. So, I want to then finish this video by talking about the overview. And the overview for both section A essays is important when you're dealing with extracts. Essentially, for the unseen extract, for paper 2, you are considering these things. It's slightly different to paper 1 because paper 1's extract isn't unseen. You have already studied it for a while with the Shakespeare play. But for this one, you haven't seen it before. So the bullet points are slightly different. Noticed earlier I mentioned about progression and developing, and the kind of penultimate bullet point there talks about the progression of the extract, how it begins, how it ends, and does something happen within the extract that changes the course of events. And in my view, that is the transformation of the alien in front of the president and how that might change the negotiations between the two sides. So I'm going to finish this video by showing you an example overview. As is always the case with English, there are a number of different ways you can write an overview. So this is not the only definitive way. And I hope in my videos over the years that I've made that clear, that I'm not suggesting that there is just one way of writing an essay. There's not just one way of analysing an extract. And there's also not just one way of structuring an essay either. So you're given a lot of flexibility. As long as you're answering the question and talking about the text, that's the main thing. So when I was writing my overview, I ended up with something like this. This is my first paragraph, and then I would go into the essay and the extract more detailed afterwards by looking at quotes and language devices and so on. So the extract from Okorafor's Lagoon focuses on the confrontation between a group of aliens and a president who is perilously clinging on to political power. Through contrasting the president's frailty with the aliens' uncompromising and resolute stance, Okorafor reinforces how power struggles and conflict can arise from the confrontation of opposing groups. Here, the transformation of Ayadale acts as the climax and poses a challenge to the president's authority. An omniscient narrator enables events to be reported and tension to build. Following Ayadale's transformation into Karl Marx, the extract ends with the president seemingly willing to enter negotiations with the aliens in the hope of creating a better future for themselves and Nigeria more broadly. So you do wonder to what extent this kind of new arrangement between these two sides is going to benefit Nigeria more broadly. So you've got that relationship between the micro and the macro, or the small world and the large world. So that is an example of an overview, but like I say, there's lots of different ways you can do this. Hopefully you can see, or you could, keep flicking back and forth between the last two slides here, how these bullet points fit into this draft. So, you can hopefully see how I've used these bullet points to help structure some kind of opening paragraph here. So hopefully that was useful. An initially quite challenging extract, I think, but hopefully in terms of revision, this has been beneficial to you to think about how you might want to go about approaching this extract and this unseen task. Thank you very much for watching, and good luck in your studies and exams. Thank you.